Welcome everyone to the very first ever episode of Manipulate This, the one tutorial channel for all your Photoshop needs. So today I wanted to cover a really cool topic. It's how to composite and manipulate your photos together to create really cool pieces of art. And today folks, I got a very special episode for you. We're going to blend subjects into backgrounds. We're going to blend the luminosity, blend the color, make some adjustments, and make a really cool piece of art out of it. So if you're looking to do your own Photoshop compositing, this is a great tutorial you might want to watch. So without further ado, instead of giving you this really long drawn out intro, let's just jump right into the tutorial. Alright, so I'm here in Photoshop, as you can see, and I have my background image taken, which is sand dunes in the desert. So I got this stock image from storyblocks.com. If you're looking for free images to use, you can go there and pay for a subscription like I do, and you get access to tons of free stock images like this. So today we're going to be taking this background and taking this subject, and we're going to be seamlessly blending in this subject to this background, even though the color and lighting is all off, but that's the beauty of compositing. So we're going to start off. Double click the background, make sure it's not locked. Now we want to go ahead and pull out this image. So that might be a little bit tricky because he has a great background, and there's a lot of ways to do this. Now before we start, one important thing to note about why I chose this image to go with this background is if you notice, the lighting is coming from the exact same direction, the upper left corner. If you look here, on these dunes, the light is hitting here, with the shadow being cast on the right side. Lighting is coming from the top left corner, and shadow is being cast on the right side. So that's good. So a quick tip is when you want to make the most realistic looking Photoshop composites, you want to have subjects and images that match lighting. Because if he had lighting coming from directly on the front, or maybe on the side, I mean, you can go in there and alter the shadows and highlights manually, but it doesn't look as good in my opinion, and it just looks a lot more natural when it's like this. And it looks a lot more believable. So there's many ways we can go about cutting them out. You could always go ahead and use the pen tool, but Photoshop 2020 has this really neat little tool right here called Object Selection. So we're going to click that, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to select him just like this. Okay? And already we have a really nice selection. So let's go ahead and mask him out. I'm going to go ahead and hit the Layer Mask button right here. All right, so that masks him out pretty well. So as you can see, there are some imperfections, mainly just because of the gray in the background. So like right here, his entire arm is kind of missing. Go up, the hair looks somewhat decent, but as you see, there's some patches that are kind of looking a little rough. So we're going to go ahead and clean this up with another amazing tool that Photoshop has, known as the Refine Edge tool. To do that, you want to make sure your mask is selected, like mine, and then go to Select and Mask under Refine. It'll show up in the Properties tab right here. Okay, so now we're going to make sure we have our brush selected, and we want a plus. Basically what that means is it adds to the selection, and we're just going to very carefully zoom in and just kind of add in some of these details back. This is the magic of Refine Brush. Now it doesn't have to be 100% perfect because this is just a compositing exercise. So I don't want you to sit here and try and be pulling your hair out over getting this exactly perfect. And you know what? I'm not going to waste my time getting it exactly perfect. So they should have probably not shot this in a background that has similar lighting and color to his actual wardrobe, but oh well. See, this is why you want to be careful. So go back here. See, we're getting a little resistance with those grays. They're meshing far too much. But Refine Edge is actually doing a really good job of understanding the difference, as you see. Even though there is a little bit of digital messing going on, it's actually not too bad. Again, I'm not going to spend forever doing this, just enough to call it a day. Okay, that doesn't look too shabby. Again, not perfect, but not too shabby either. All right, so we're going to go over here. We're going to clean up his neck a little bit. I don't know what's going on there. So we're going to clean that up. Some spots you kind of just got to go through manually. Obviously, if you were working on a really big art piece, you would really take your time and thoroughly comb through this. Comb through this and just make sure that things looked as they needed to. So it's always good to be switching back and forth. Make sure his neck is blended in. Okay. We'll go up here. I'm not going to mess with his hair. That looks fine. All right. We're going to zoom out real quick. Oh, his upper thigh is looking like it could need some desperate work right here. We don't want to lose those details. And the legs I'll forgive. The feet look okay. Now, of course, see there are some other artifacts here. So we're just going to go ahead and zoom through this to make it a little bit easier on you. Okay, and there we have it. So again, I'm going to reiterate this. This isn't 100% perfect. If I was going to use this for a piece or use it for a client, I would probably go through and spend maybe another 20 minutes just making sure every edge is as refined as possible. But for now, it'll do because this is a compositing tutorial and I don't want to spend too much time focusing on cutting out the subject. However, with compositing and manipulation, you're going to spend a lot of time pulling out subjects of backgrounds, so this is good to know. Refine edge is going to be one of your best friends. But now I feel pretty confident we have a pretty decent cutout of this subject. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go right click. We're going to duplicate this layer. Actually, you know what? Since we're not worried about non-destructive editing, let's go ahead and apply the layer mask. There we go. Now we can go ahead and duplicate the layer. We're going to duplicate it to the sand dunes layer and hit OK. So again, we're not worried about applying the layer mask. I'm not going to need the background anymore, so we'll just go right over here, and here's our wonderful subject. Whoops. All right, we're going to click here, pull him up. Now, before I resize him, I always like to convert to a smart object, so that way, as I change his size, I don't have to worry about any distortion or any like that when I change his size around. So I'm going to say that's a decent size to put him in the foreground. So there we go. We'll just plop him right there and we can start our editing. So we'll go ahead and rasterize him. So the first things first, before we do any coloring, take a look at his feet. That doesn't really look realistic. Nobody just stands on a flat surface like that, especially sand, and looks like that. So we're going to fix that and make his feet submerged in the sand and actually make it look like his feet are submerged. But we also need to color him into the scene, and we need to match his lighting and do a bunch of that stuff. So we'll go ahead and start with his feet. So we'll go ahead and start a mask. By the way, I could do the commands, but I like for you to visually see what I'm doing in case you're newer to Photoshop and you want to remember where the buttons are. So this little guy right here, create your layer mask. Now that we got our layer mask selected, go ahead and hit B on your keyboard or go right here to brush. Make sure your selection is on black. You can use the X key to toggle back and forth between white and black. I'm going to stretch out my brush again, make sure it's normal. All right, now what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to fade out his feet. And while that might look kind of strange, and by the way, I'm using the bracket keys on my keyboard to quickly change the size of my brush. A very, very helpful tool to use, by the way, if you don't use it yet. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of brush his feet out for the time being. And I know that looks strange, but we will go in and refine his feet in a little while once all the coloring is done. This is also why I didn't mess with refining the edge of his feet, because they were going to be covered anyway with the sand. So my idea is I want to make it look like his feet are fully submerged in the dune sand. Right now it's getting there, but it's far from perfect and it looks pretty fake. So, but again, we will do that. Ideally, we'll come in later and we will take the brush tool and we'll set a really low flow and we'll kind of just fine tune the sand around his ankles. So again, we'll come back to that. Let's go ahead and get to his coloring. So let's go ahead and we'll start with adding an adjustment layer. So the first thing I like to do is usually do a curves, and you can kind of get the initial luminosity to match between him and the background. Now to do this, you can do a special trick, and you want to create a solid color layer first, And let's do gray. It doesn't matter what shade of gray. You can just do that one. Make sure it's on the very top. And you're going to want to set this to color. So that way it only is affecting the color of the entire image. So we use this to match the luminosity correctly. So now that we're back on our subject layer, go ahead down to this button right here and create another adjustment curves layer right here. Boom. Okay. Now, to make sure this curves layer isn't affecting the entire image, we want to just attach it to the subject. Well, how do we do that? Well, you could hold Alt in your keyboard and see that little arrow? You click that, and you can click it again to unclip it. Or you can click this little guy right here. They both do the same thing. Okay? So, we got that. And now we're just going to grab right here in the very middle of our curve. And this is, by the way, selecting all the colors. And you're going to just want to pull down a little bit until you can kind of match the scene. Now, if we do this, that's way too dark. And if we do that, that's way too bright. So usually it just needs a little bit. I'm going to say right about there looks good. You can kind of toggle it on and off. That might be a little dark. You don't want to go too much. Again, this tutorial isn't about perfection. You just kind of want to get the general idea. I'm going to say that's good. And recreating an original edit. Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay? So, we'll go ahead. We'll get rid of our color fill layer because we don't need it now. We just needed it to match the luminosity. So, and also since this is only matching the luminosity, let's go ahead and change the blend mode to luminosity. So that way it's only going to affect the luminosity. Man, I said luminosity like 50 times in that sentence. All right, that's done. Cool. As you can see, it's already looking a little bit better. So now we want to do a special gradient map. This is one of my favorite color matching techniques. And the great thing about Photoshop is there's quite a few ways to go around to matching your subject color-wise to the background. But today I'm going to show you my favorite technique, and I really like the way it works. Now keep in mind Photoshop has some built-in tools like auto color, and there's even a match color, but today we're not going to deal with those. We're going to go to adjustment layer, make sure you're on your subject layer. We're going to create a gradient map, okay? Now again, make sure you have it toggled to your subject if it's not already. So now it's just going to be this gradient from black all the way to white. Now, so how do we match the colors? Well, I'm going to show you. Let's make sure our curves didn't, there we go. That got unclipped. So we're going to pull up our gradient. Make sure you also have the adjustment selected and not the mask. That's very important, otherwise it's not going to be working. Okay, so here is our gradient. Up here is the opacity, and down here is the colors of what it fades to. So the idea here is we're going to take these colors and match them to the background, so that way the subject is now the color of the background. So we're going to take the highlight and we're going to match a highlight portion of the background. So let's do, you want to try and do the brightest portion. I'm going to say that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's just go with that. No? Maybe. I guess I'm just clicking around. Okay, well, that looks good. It's kind of like a warm peach color. Now we'll do the darkest part, which I'm going to do down here somewhere. That looks good. All right. Now, I like to do a third point, which is right here in the middle. And I'll just go ahead and put the location right here at 50%. And then let's do this at like, we'll kind of sample right here for the midtones. I mean, I could do up here if I really wanted to. But I think in my original edit, I just kept everything. And you know what? Why not? We'll just keep it like the original and not go too far. All right. So now we have it colored to the actual subject. So now what we want to do, hit OK. We want to go ahead and pull the opacity all the way down to 0. And then you can kind of just slowly bring it in until you feel like it matches the scene. Generally, I kind of find the sweet spot right around about 50%. So once you have matched your subject successfully to the background with a color, we're going to make sure that this layer right here, the gradient map layer, is blended to just the color. So you're going to hit the blend mode, go all the way down here to color. And what this ensures is that it's only affecting this particular subject's color and nothing else. Because see, if I go and put it on hard light, it just changes it around. So you only want to be affecting the color, not luminosity, not saturation, just the color. And again, play with this, and as you can see at 100%, you're not really going to want that. But if you play around and find the sweet spot, which again is about, for me, 50%, you might push it to 60 depending on what you like, but we're going to go with 50 for this tutorial. And already we're seeing a much bigger improvement. So now that we got those two out of the way, let's go ahead and add an additional curves layer just to kind of add some extra shadow in there. We don't want to do too much. There we go. Maybe just kind of fine tune it a little. You want to be careful with this one because it could be really easy to kind of over darken it. You just want to make sure. There we go. Perfect. All right. Let's go ahead and add a color balance layer. And this is just to kind of fine tune our image. And this is you kind of just do by eye and just kind of eye it, make sure it looks good. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, drag your opacity all the way down, and you kind of just pull it in. Now, as you notice, his legs right over here are looking a little red, so that's kind of in the midtones and the shadows, so let's go ahead and get rid of that. Not really sure what's going on there. So that we could kind of just mask out, actually, which is what I think we will do. Make sure his midtones are good. I don't want to pull back on the reds too much because then he starts looking yellow, like he's got jaundice. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and use a brush. I didn't do this in the original image, but you know what? Don't worry about it. I know it probably really didn't do much for his legs, but oh well. He looks a little bit better. Yeah, see, he's a little more blue here. He's kind of matching the background more. So as you see, ladies and gentlemen, in just one curve, a gradient map, a secondary curve, and another color balance, he's looking to blend the scene quite well, actually. And so now we're just going to make him pop out artistically. So we're moving on to my favorite portion, which is highlights and shadows. So to do that, we're going to do 3 separate exposure layers. The way I like to do it is I do 2 exposure layers first for a first shadow, and then I do a secondary shadow, which kind of targets the main shadow areas, and then a highlights layer. So I'll get into explaining that. So for these exposure layers, we're going to, again, clip it to the subject, control the mask, or click the mask, control I to invert it, and then we're going to make sure we actually choose the segment of the mask, or segment of the adjustment layer. And I like to actually kind of just start with -1. I find that's a pretty comfortable value. And this, what's great about shadows and highlights is there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Ooh, I'm just now noticing the refine edge broke that up. That looks pretty ugly. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and use the X key again to move around black and white. And we're just going to paint over the general areas that are not in the light. Okay, this doesn't have to be anything fancy. We're just kind of getting the underlying portion here, which is mainly his legs, all of that good stuff. And then what we'll do here is we'll also mess with the opacity of this. Okay, this is where we start getting in the highlights. Actually, let's get rid of that. There we go. All right. So you might look at that and be like, what are you doing that looks like crap? Yeah, it does, but we click here. Again, we do that trick where we pull it down and we kind of just slowly bring it in, okay? Things about 50% look pretty good. So it's already starting to look a little better. So we do our secondary shadows, and this layer of shadows is where we get more refined and specific with what it is that we're actually darkening. So again, we're going to Control I, invert it, and then click the mask, or excuse me, click the adjustment layer, and we're going to pull down -2. And then this time, I'm going to go in and actually just paint the parts that are actually just in shadow. And under here is going to be shadow. Under here is going to be shadow. Underneath his leg is going to be shadow. Actually, you know what? We're going to have a highlight down there. But down here, and maybe just around his belt. Again, guys, I'm just trying to give you a quick example. I'm not doing anything fancy. Because again, if I was doing something fancy, I would take a lot more time. And we also want to get a portion of the face. See how I'm being a lot more specific in my selection of what it is that I'm doing. All right, we'll call that good for now. So we're going to pull this way down and kind of just slowly pull that in. Let me see, it does make a difference. Whoops, there we go. So that's what we want. Although we could definitely get rid of that. Looked like crap. So we can definitely get rid of that. So, but I definitely like having a shadow here. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to our highlights. So we're going to create another exposure layer. Alt-click, click this, Control-I, again to invert the mask. Now we're going to click on our adjustment layer, bring the exposure to +1 because, well, we're creating highlights. Now, the way you do highlights is a little bit different than the way I did the shadows. So we're going to highlight not every crease of clothing, although you can to make it look a little more realistic. I'm just going to try and go for the fine edges to bring out the highlight, and then again adjust the opacity to kind of see where that goes. So I'm going to start by adjusting my brush size, and then I'm going to hold down Control, Alt, right click, and I want my hardness to be at 100%. And I'll show you how we do this. So we're just gonna, whoops, need it on white. I'm just gonna draw in my highlights. Okay, there we go. So now the second step is to hold down Control Alt, right click again, and we want the hardness at 0. Okay, we want a really soft brush, and we're going to increase our brush size, and we're just going to go in and we're just, whoops, just kidding, hit X, and then we're just going to kind of, we want to decrease that a little bit, just kind of erase what we had. This way it kind of creates a nice highlight here. This smooths out the highlight a lot. But as you see, we still maintain the highlight, which is really nice. You're just kind of brushing it away softly, just like that. Okay? Again, look at the difference that made. Really helps you pop. Now, as far as blending it, you might look at this and be like, well, the highlights are way overdone. So we can either adjust the opacity manually, like a lot of us do, and bring it in, which looks good, or you can use the blend if option. So make sure you're actually selected on your layer, double click, and you'll get this wonderful layer style box. Now for the blend if, you're going to hold down the Alt and we're going to create a transition. What this will do, I think it looks nicer. It'll actually blend the light or the brights of the image. Just like that. That looks so much smoother. I didn't do this in the original composition, but that does look better. We can actually adjust the opacity too to make it look a little more smooth. It's kind of over. Oh, you know what? We forgot the leg. Yeah, the blend if is great. It basically adjusts. I forgot to show you. It will adjust based on the color. So, for example, if blend if is gray on this layer and I pull this back, it'll start dissipating everything with this amount of brightness and this amount of darkness. But we'll do that in a different tutorial. But it works great for blending stuff. All right, so we're going to go and just kind of just one of those forgotten ones. All right. And at that point, he's pretty much, we want to adjust brightness. Yeah, 50% seems to be the magic number today, folks. I don't know what it is. So, all right, at this point, he's pretty well blended in after, 7 exposure layers of just fine-tuning. Now, we get to tackle his feet, which definitely need some help. Sorry about the zooming in, zooming out. I just changed my scroll wheel to zooming in and it's messed with me a little bit. So, all right, so we're going to click back on the mask. We're going to shrink our brush a little bit because I want to kind of go in here and fine tune his feet. I'm going to turn the flow way down, maybe like 5%. I like even numbers to work with. So then I'm just going to kind of start. I kind of want to give the impression that he's actually like in the sand and not just brushed in like I had it. There we go. It's starting to look better already. The one thing I love about flow, man. All right, that's looking better. Zoom in on this guy, do the same thing. It's kind of like math. What you do to one side, you got to do to the other. Just going to swing on by just like that. Great. That looks fantastic. Kind of just going to go in here. Luckily with sand, just because of the nature of how sand is, I'm not really worried about using a soft brush and kind of having this fade here. It kind of just looks a little more realistic with how sand is. So, and you know, this is just a compositing tutorial. I'm not actually working on an elaborate art piece. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about having the results be totally perfect. So that does look better, but I feel like there's one more touch we can do. And that's going to make it seem like his feet are actually rippled in the sand versus just at this point. So, all right, so to do this, we're going to use the Liquify tool. So start by selecting all your layers, Control G to group them. I hit Control J to make a copy of that, and then I hit Control E to make a reference layer, just like this. So now I actually have everything grouped in one layer, and now I can go to Liquify and actually alter this without having to lose any other details, which is exactly what I want. So I could try and use the bloat tool or Liquify and move the sand around, which I tried doing originally, and it just looked like crap. But I did find using the pucker tool worked quite well. Now let's check this out. So I'm just going to kind of go around here and use this, and it almost creates the illusion that his feet are kind of submerged in the sand. Now up close it does look funky, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of does look weird. But it looks like the sand is depressing down, which is exactly the illusion we want for his legs to be in the sand. Now look at that. That actually looks like he stuck his leg in the sand. And as you see, the sand is almost kind of forming around his ankle. That's exactly what we want. So we're going to go over to this leg, and we're going to do the exact same thing. You just got to slowly go around, stretch it out a little more. And I don't have a really big brush. I'm just doing this with pretty much default settings. You can really toy around with this if you really want to take your time and get serious with it. This is to kind of just show you the power of how you can create the illusion that his feet are in the sand. And we're just doing this till basically it looks like, there we go. It looks like there's an actual physical depression in the sand where his feet should be. Okay, I'm going to say that looks good. And already you can tell that that looks night and day different. Well, maybe not night and day different, but definitely it looks a lot more realistic. So, his feet are in the sand. Actually what I don't like is that it got rid of the fade. I kind of like that of the original layer, how there's that fade there. But you know what? It'll suffice. So, lastly, very last, we need to make a shadow because, well, it doesn't really make much sense to have this without a shadow. So, we're going to go back down to our original group. We're going to apply the layer mask, which basically just masks out of feet. So we're going to copy him, and we want to make sure we have all these layers too. So we're going to click this layer, hold Shift, drag up, Control J, Control E, and it makes a layer with just him with all the exposures on it like I just did. So hopefully it wasn't too fast for you. So now we need to make him a shadow. How do we do that? Well, we start by going Image. I'm sorry. We hit Control on the icon right here, or on the thumb of the layer. That selects him. You go to Edit, Fill. Let's do black. Okay, that turns him into just a total black shape. I'm not sure what this is right here, but you know what? This is a tutorial. I'm not going to worry about it, right? Right. Worrying didn't get anybody anywhere. So we're going to go to Filter, Gaussian Blur, and I like to do, you can do 15, but I find like 12 to 20 is kind of the sweet spot. So 15, and then we're going to go and set the opacity down to about 20, maybe 33%. Let's do that. Now we're going to take him, hit Control T, and do a vertical flip. Hold down Shift and kind of drag him down where he matches the feet like this. All right, and now that we got the shadow in place, it doesn't really look exactly realistic, primarily because the lighting isn't coming directly from overhead or from behind him. It's coming from the top upper left corner. So we need to reflect that, no pun intended. So with your shadow still selected, and after it's been vertically changed, right click, and we're going to do a perspective warp. Okay? And this, we want to go ahead and pull it out like this to kind of make it a little more realistic. Okay, hit enter. This way it's kind of flat against the ground as a shadow should be. And then we're going to Control T again, and we're going to distort it. And this time, we're going to change the angle by grabbing these two endpoints and making it so that way it's coming at just like it would. Alright, what's going on here? I'm getting all messed up. Alright, just like that. Now you're going to want to have your shadow under... Whoops. I lied. Just kidding, everybody. Ha ha ha. Now I can just go in here, mask this real quick. Bring up a brush. Just to kind of fine-tune the shadow. And actually, let's go ahead and just... Then there we go. Not 100% perfect, but definitely don't look too bad. And that's pretty much it, guys. That is how you go ahead and you get a subject fully matched to the background. So at this point, we went ahead and we made a curves adjustment layer to do the initial darkening. We did a gradient map to match his coloring to the background. And you can do this, again, with any subject in any background. We did a secondary curve to kind of darken. We did a color balance to just fine-tune and match him. Again, we used kind of a full-on projection of these colors, so then we kind of just changed the opacity to match. Feel free with whatever background and subject you use to play around. Then we did some shadowing, well, quite a bit of shadowing, and then some highlighting to make it pop a little more. And then finally, well, not finally yet. We altered the feet to make them look a little more in the sand, and then finally we added a shadow to match also the lighting from where the sun is coming from. So now it looks a lot more realistic just because his highlights and shadows match the background of where it's coming from, and his shadow even reflects that the sun is right over here off frame. So that's pretty much it, guys. And as you can see, if we pop all these layers off, how far we have come since then. Whoops. So we started off with that, put on our curves, we added our gradient map, we added a secondary curve, we added a color balance, then we did our first layer of shadows, second layer of refined shadows, or what I like to call specific shadows, did our highlights, and then we did our shadow. And that's about it, guys. So now, to summarize and end everything up, let's go ahead and select everything by holding Shift, click all the way down to the end layer. I'm going to Control J, Control E. So now I have everything in this layer. And we're going to do what I like to do to all my final copies, which is a camera raw filter to kind of just make everything pop. So filter, camera raw, or again, you can hit Shift, Control A. So let's do that, Shift, Control A. All right, well, I'm not really too sure what this is all about and why my shadow is bleeding into this layer, but we're just gonna do our best to ignore that and just kind of focus on the image itself. Capiche? So let's go ahead and start messing with highlights, shadows. I like to pull my highlights down, pull my shadows up, although but now it's kind of a really ugly orange. So you can kind of mess with your temperature. And if you do photography at all, this might be very much familiar territory for you. I kind of have a general idea of what I like and what I like to do for these. And again, it just depends on the picture, the environment, the subject. There's a lot of things that kind of come into play. I just like to go through each one of these things. Add some sharpening. If you go that way, it goes way too much, but I kind of just like to bring it down right here in the middle. Color mixer. All right, this is one of my favorite ones too. So luminance, it affects the brightness of all these colors. Saturation increases the power or projection of each color. And then hue just changes the color. So luminance, we can mainly just affect his belt, which I think in the original I had it turned way down, but like we'll pull this up. Oranges, that kind of just affects the desert. I kind of like to have it a little more on this side. Yellow is kind of the same thing. Do I want it really bright or do I want it really dark? And gold, we'll kind of pull it on this side. I'm not going to mess with any of the greens, aquas, blues, purples, or magentas because, well, there's really none in these pictures. So saturation, kind of the same thing. There's really not a huge difference, so I'll leave it about here. I don't want it to be too gold, but I don't want it to be too cold either, so I kind of like to find a happy middle ground. Hue, I'm not going to mess with the hue. All right, color grading. I do this only on selective pictures. You don't have to, and for this picture, I'm probably not going to, just because, well, every time I do it, this subject turns really blue, and I'm not really a fan of that, so I'm just going to skip it for this example. Distortion, vignette. We'll add a little bit of vignette in there. And then effects, just add a dash of green. Calibration, I don't ever really mess with calibration either. I mean, you can, but you don't have to. And I think that about does her. Yep. So we're going to hit OK. And voila. All right, guys. So through all the final editing, we ended up with this. So despite the terrible shading on his neck right here, and something's wrong with his face. Like right under his eye, it's kind of looking a little bruised. He's definitely overly sharpened, but you know what? That's the kind of look I was going for. And dear God, his legs, what is going on? They're like drumsticks, orange, very orange and red. That could probably just be fixed with the color correction and masking. But you know what, guys? We're not going to pick the nitty gritty here. Despite the awful shading on his neck and some other major flaws, it actually looks pretty decent, I guess. I mean, at least he does blend in with the background quite well, and because of the grain and the sharpening, he looks like he fits in. So definitely not as good as the first pass when I did it with a thumbnail, but hey, you know what? You live and learn. So I hope this has helped you. The main process and main purpose of this is to kind of teach you a bunch of really great techniques, tricks, and stuff you can use in order for your own compositions to look really good, and for your own composites to look fantastic, unlike mine, which, well, this is what happens when you rush things in a tutorial, ladies and gentlemen. If you managed to make it this far in the tutorial, and you enjoy me and you enjoy my tutorial, well, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment, let me know what you liked, and if you did enjoy it, and stick around because there's going to be a lot more really cool Photoshop tutorials coming your way. I'll see you guys in the next video. See you then.